Joining us on Newsmakers on this Sunday is the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Democratic Congressman Chris Van Hollen. Thanks for joining us. And here for the questioning, David Wasserman, the House editor of the Cook Political Report, and congressional reporter Jonathan Allen of Politico. Congressman, let me begin. What worries you the most about next year's midterm elections?
Well, look, this is a very difficult cycle historically. If you go back over the span of our history, a new president's party often does not do very well in the first midterm election. In fact, since Abraham Lincoln was president, there have only been 2 times when a new president's party has picked up seats in the first congressional election, the first midterm. So we know history presents us with a headwind. The good news is that we recognized that pretty early on, very early on at the DCCC, and on January 1st, we said, look what we're up against historically. Let's try and do everything we can to plan for this, to make sure that our candidates are battle-tested, our incumbents as well as our candidates. So what worries me most is just looking at that historical pattern. The good news is I know that we're doing everything possible to prepare for that.
Part of that, of course, is recruitment. Can you explain the process you've undertaken to recruit candidates in 2010?
Yes. We've been very successful at recruiting candidates over the last 2 cycles, and that success, I think, has been reflected in the fact that we picked up 54 seats between 2006 and 2008. So you can understand that the territory that's sort of open to us is obviously narrowed. But we believe very strongly that staying on offense is a very important part of our strategy. So we have put in play at least 20 seats. There may be more than that as the months go by. But one of the things we're very focused on is looking at seats where we think the incumbents do not reflect the views of their constituents, or in open seats. And there are a number of open seat possibilities for Democrats this cycle. So staying on offense is a very important part of our strategy this time around.
Jonathan Allen.
Congressman, if you could look forward a year, and I know we're a little ways out, but if you could look forward a year, what is the one House race that you think is going to be exciting, could come down to the wire, would be maybe a bellwether that people could look at and say that'll be a fun one, an exciting one to watch, maybe one that'll have you biting your nails at the end of the day?
That's a tough question. I mean, you've got a whole lot of House races. There are going to be a lot of exciting races, and our members know that these are going to be very competitive races. One race where we've got a terrific candidate is in Nebraska. Tom White, not on people's radar screen right now, but he's an example of a candidate that really fits that district. He's a moderate, and it's the district that Obama won in Nebraska. As you know, in Nebraska they have electoral seats divided up within the state, and that was one that the president won. And again, we have a terrific candidate there.
That's the Omaha district, the
yes.
one represented by Lee Terry.
Yes.
David Wasserman.
Chairman Van Hollen, I want to move to a different part of the country. This past week, there was a special election that you worked very hard on up in upstate New York, the North Country of New York, and you won that election for the new Congressman Bill Owens. Can you take us behind the scenes and explain to viewers how the DCCC approaches these special elections? A Politico story noted that the last 6 times a House seat has changed hands in a special election, the Democrats have won. You guys seem to have some sort of secret sauce involved in this, yet it's sort of a stealth operation in the districts, is it not? Voters don't often know that the party is actually parachuting in and working really hard. What goes on behind the scenes?
Well, there are a couple of components to the special elections operations, and you're right, we've got a good record at the DCCC on special elections, and New York 23 is a great example. First thing is you need a good candidate, and Bill Owens was a candidate that fit that district very well, had a military background, and then was very involved in economic development there. But you got a good candidate, but you got to make sure your candidate gets the message out, and then of course you need to get the vote out. So we worked very closely with Bill in making it clear that he needed to identify his strengths and how they fit the district. Then we had a terrific get out the vote operation, and we planned it very, very early on, and it went like clockwork. As opposed to places like Virginia and New Jersey, we had a good turnout on our vote. We also got a very good share of the independent vote because our candidate was able to appeal on a bipartisan basis. And then, of course, you had the Republican Civil War, where You had a Republican candidate, and our counterpart, the NRCC, spent close to $1 million supporting the Republican candidate, who then dropped out of the race when the Conservative Party candidate became the hero to the Tea Party movement around the country, and you had Sarah Palin weighing in, and of course then Didi Scazafaza, the Republican candidate, collapsed. And we worked very hard to get her support. We asked Steve Israel to go up and sit down with her and talk with her, and she was persuaded, just as Wayne Gilchrist was persuaded in Maryland's 1st District last cycle, that the Democratic candidate, Bill Owens, really would fit her legacy better than the far-right Republican candidate. And we worked very closely with the White House. All cylinders came together. So it was, I think, a textbook example of how to just conduct the nuts and bolts of a campaign. And as you say, we won New York 20 a little while ago, and I'm just asking no more members to retire. We stop the special elections at this point.
But did the events of last weekend surprise you? Were they to be anticipated by you and the Democrats?
Are you talking New York 23
New York 23.
Or generally? New York 23 we thought was a jump ball. There was a point when our candidate was ahead in the polling, and then of course when the Republican candidate dropped out and you had a surge for the Conservative Party candidate Hoffman, he went a few points ahead, but there were still at that point 18% of the electorate undecided. And that 18%, clearly, a majority of them ended up deciding to vote for Bill Owens. There were probably a mix of people in there. Clearly, there were people who were undecided even before the Republican candidate got out. But then her voters, I think, either stayed at home or followed her lead and voted for Bill Owens because she endorsed him. And I should say every local paper, to Bill Owens' credit, every local paper ended up endorsing him. Originally, some of them endorsed the Republican candidate, and some of them endorsed Bill Owens. But once it was down to Bill Owens and the Conservative candidate, they made it clear that he couldn't answer any questions about what was happening locally.
That sort of turned out to be the highlight for Democrats on election night last Tuesday. But in Virginia and New Jersey, things didn't go quite as well as they did in upstate New York. And in Virginia, next year you have potentially 4 Democratic members who will face really tough races for re-election. Can you sort of diagnose what went wrong in Democrats' effort to get out the vote there? President Obama was very active in trying to energize the Democratic base, yet the Democratic candidate for governor in Virginia got fewer than half of the votes that he did last year.
Right.
How is that going to change next year?
Well, I mean, you identified exactly what the problem was. It was very low turnout. I mean, the individuals and voters who came to the polls to vote for President Obama in 2008, many of them stayed home in this election. And it's my view that they were simply not motivated to come out in what were state races. I mean, in the state of New Jersey, you have a lot of local issues. The Turnpike issue was a big issue. State of Virginia, you have their own mix of local issues. So what happened was the more conservative part of the electorate was motivated to come out for a lot of reasons, including the national climate. But the Obama voters did not see the Obama agenda at stake in what are state races. After all, the only 2 people who won last Tuesday who can vote on the Obama agenda were the Democrats. A special election in New York and a special election in California. Democrats won both those. Those are the only people who are going to be voting on the Obama agenda, and both of them were Democrats who won. So that was clearly the problem there. If we see a low turnout like that in 2010, that is going to be trouble for Democrats. I believe we'll get a better turnout, just as we got in New York 23. It's the mix of voters that comes out. And to get those voters out, they're going to have to understand that the issues they voted on in 2008 in the presidential year are at stake, and that the success of the Obama agenda will be at stake, because if he doesn't have a strong majority, he will not be able to move the country in the new direction that people voted for in 2008.
Congressman, let me springboard off that a little bit. You have in Virginia now a Republican governor, and Republicans will control redistricting in a few years. And so while your House candidates weren't on the ballot, the election results in Virginia may have had a lot of effect on their future, or could have a lot of effect on their future. As DCCC chairman, how do you allocate resources and make decisions about how much you're going to spend on Virginia candidates in 2010 who in 2012 may have very different districts designed to draw them out. How do you decide whether to allocate resources there or maybe somewhere else in the country? And how do you view redistricting coming up in that state?
Our goal is to maximize our wins in 2010. We have an effort going on to look at redistricting around the country. Mike Thompson of California was tasked to head that effort up last year. In fact, it was almost 2 years ago that we asked him to take on that challenge, and so they've been very focused on looking ahead. At the DCCC